We are going to record this webinar just so others can view it, or you can access it in the future. So again, thank you so much for taking the time out of everyone's busy schedules to join us this evening. We're going to be focusing on how we can build routines at home.
Yeah, and just to mention here that we will be dropping relevant links in the chat. So, yeah.
So again, during the webinar, I think, just to orient everyone, we did put information for calling in the chat if there's any challenges accessing on your device. Oops, excuse me. The Q&A function will send questions to everyone. If you have questions, you're welcome to put them in the Q&A. And we will respond at the end of the presentation, or we will try to track them. We don't always see it as we're speaking, but we'll do our very best. It will be recorded. And at the end of the webinar, we will share a link in the chat for an evaluation. We really, truly value your feedback and really appreciate you taking the time to fill this out. It helps us make sure that these seminars are as relevant as possible and supportive as possible for all of our Nest families. So I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Michelle Lee. I am a child clinical psychologist who works at the NYU Child Study Center, supporting autistic individuals across the lifespan and their families. In addition to that role, I also work with the NYU Nest consulting project. So I provide social emotional consultation to the social workers, guidance counselors as part of the Nest program as well. And then I'll turn it over to my fabulous co-presenter to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. A warm welcome to you all who are live here with us. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. And I guess whoever that is watching this at another time, hello. Just a reminder that these workshops are brought to you by New York University, the ASD Nest Support Project, and they are sponsored by the Department of Education. My name is Yalda. It is spelled Y-A-L-D-A. I use pronouns she, her, hers. I am a woman of color with long brown hair. I'm wearing glasses and a red sweater, and my role at the NYU Nest Project is an instructional consultant. I visit Nest schools to support school staff in implementing the Nest model, as well as providing workshops and professional developments. I'm super excited to be presenting. This is our first one of the three with the amazing Dr. Michelle Lee this school year, 2022-2023.
So again, just to orient, I know some of you have attended these groups in the past, some of you may not have, or these presentations. Really the goal of these is threefold. So we really want to be able to provide social emotional support for our children and also for ourselves and for caregivers who are on this call. We really want to encourage family-to-family advice and community building. We love when folks share out suggestions, ideas in the chat. And have the opportunity to do that. And then we're also going to learn more about home-based strategies specific to autism. And that's something we're really going to be focusing on tonight, is thinking about how can we build routines and what can routines look like to support autistic individuals. So again, our goals for tonight, we're going to start by just thinking about why routines are helpful for autistic individuals and for their families and caregivers. We're going to explore examples of ways to establish routines at home. We're also going to talk about what the Nest program and how they're implementing routines at school, so you all can have a sense of what your child may be experiencing during the school day. And then we'll conclude by talking a little bit about providing supports when routines change or when there are changes in the plan. Just to set some community norms and expectations around this evening. So we really want to focus on acknowledging that everyone is coming from a place of good intention, leaning into discomfort if we're talking about new things or different things. We're all going to be sharing that together. and really focusing on being open to hearing feedback from each other. So again, I always say on these calls, like the parents and caregivers and family members on these calls, or if there are any advocates, self-advocates on these calls, are the true experts. We really love hearing from you. And so as you're comfortable, feel free to share out in the chat if things are resonating or things that you've tried at home, and we'll have a couple of opportunities for share out as well. So we're going to start with some grounding, why routines, talk about what routines can look like at Nest, spend the bulk of our time thinking about how might we translate this to the home environment. And we'll have time for Q&A at the end, although feel free to ask questions throughout as well. And I'll do my best to kind of double back and forth between presenting and looking at the chat. So I wanted to start grounding tonight with some positive, some parenting affirmations. So the idea behind positive affirmations is that we're often really kind to other people and maybe not so kind to ourselves. And so sometimes we really need to take a deliberate moment to affirm ourselves. So these are some affirmations. You can all just say them silently to yourself or aloud to yourself. And again, affirmations are something everyone finds an affirmation that works and resonates with them, but it can often be helpful to do for yourself. And many of our children and students enjoy doing them as well. So for tonight, some of the affirmations we wanted to share were that I can live in the moment rather than dwelling on the past. I learn and grow with my child. I'm doing the best that I can. I make the world better, and so does my child. Okay, we're going to start with just a quick finding common ground activity. This is something that students in the NEST program often do and focus on, is finding common ground in their social development interventions. And I guess we are already kind of in the midst of fall. But what I'm going to ask is that everyone take the next minute or two to type in one thing in the chat if you are able to do so. One thing that you're looking forward to for this fall. And then don't press enter yet. When I say go, we're going to press enter and we'll see everyone's responses at the same time. So I'll give everyone a minute to think what's one thing, whether it's, holidays, pumpkin flavored things, finally being able to wear sweaters again, something you're looking forward to in the school year, one thing you're looking forward to this fall. Oh, I see nature walks. Awesome. So yep. So go ahead and press enter. Oh, Thanksgiving, going to the Catskills, some self-care. Oh, I see some wonderful, right, supports in place at school, skiing. Oh yes, I love skiing. Spending time with family. I see some really nice, getting 10% cut of the Halloween candy. That's fabulous. The weather. I see a lot about the holidays, spending time with family. So a lot of common ground here amongst everyone who's here tonight, and things to be looking forward to, and having those social connections, maybe having some self-care time with a trip, having holiday seasons around the corner, whether it's Halloween or Thanksgiving or Christmas was mentioned in the chat. Wonderful. So lots of things to look forward to. And hoping to see progress and change, right? Like supporting our kids. I see Yalda agreeing with that, right? Like looking forward to continuing to see those supports as well. Okay, so I wanted to start out, we're talking about routines. We wanted to start out by sharing a self-advocate and an autistic individual's perspective on why routines are important. I'm not going to play the whole video, but we're just going to play a part. This is Ella. She has a YouTube channel called Purple Ella, and she speaks on a lot of different topics around being autistic and what that has meant for her, but we're going to hear her take on routines.
Hi, Purple Ella here, and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk to you about autism and routines. So in today's video, I'm going to talk to you about why autistic people enjoy and need routines. I'm going to talk about when routines can become a problem for autistic people. I'm going to talk about how we can help autistic people adapt to change in their routines. And I'm also going to talk about my routine, what it looks like and how I implement it and how it helps me through my day. So why do autistic people need routines? Speaking for me personally, I find that I need a daily routine in order to keep in control of my life. So the world can feel like it's really chaotic and crazy and anything can happen. It's really super unpredictable and I just don't know where I am with things a lot of the time, and changes can happen and things that I don't like can happen, and it all just feels like a big messy room and I just feel like I'm sat in the middle of it, unable to control anything. And if I put in place a routine, then that means that everything gets neat and tidy and I know what's going to happen and I feel in control and I feel calm, and this is what reduces my anxiety enough to a manageable enough level to be able to function day to day. Without my routine, I would feel completely out of control, which would lead me to having more meltdowns and more shutdowns and just generally struggling more. So it just helps me keep in control of my life, which makes me feel happy, and happy Ella is a good Ella.
So I'm going to pause there. We just wanted to give like a brief overview, but I think what she's really highlighting, right, is like how routines can help with anxiety, how routines can help give this sense of predictability in a world that can feel very unpredictable. Yalda, did you want to add something? Oh.
No, sorry, I just hit unmute, but sorry, go ahead.
So routines can do a lot. They can help everyone in the family know what's coming next. So they can be really helpful for kids and individuals. They can also be helpful for caregivers to know kind of what to expect. They really can help support with emotion regulation and reduce anxiety by helping make things feel more predictable and kind of giving more resources then to cope for when things are unpredictable. If there are certain things that we know are going to happen or that we can predict, it can free up almost some of that mental space and coping for things that are less predictable. Routines are also really powerful for building new skills. So if we're trying to learn something new, if we're teaching something, breaking things down, building a routine around it can be a really powerful way and a really helpful way to support learning something new. So why are routines helpful for, and we're talking about why they're helpful for autistic individuals, although I think many of these are helpful across, you know, the spectrum of neurodiversity. For many of us, routines can be helpful. It helps support predictability. It helps support knowing what's coming next. It can reduce anxiety and that cognitive load, or that idea of, you know, if I know what's happening next, I might not need to be as actively kind of thinking about it. So reducing some of that cognitive demand. They can be really powerful in helping prepare for transitions, like big or small, whether it's a transition from being done with dinner to going to take a shower, or transitioning from, okay, now we're in school and now we're going to the holidays, which will be, you know, something that we can talk more about as well. It also can really enhance this sense of feeling in control, which can be really, you know, important for all of us in developing our autonomy, in developing coping. And they really can help increase independence as well. So as we're building new skills and supporting building new skills through routines, they can help individuals access increased independence and really learn what's going to be most effective and important for them. They also can be really helpful in promoting organization and also safety. So having certain routines around navigating in the community, for example, can really help promote safety as well. And I'll turn it over to Yalda to talk about routines and executive functioning.
Yeah, so here we can touch upon some of the ways that executive functioning skills are nurtured through routines. Obviously, all the points that Michelle just mentioned are part of executive functionings, and I can just like quickly say executive functioning as we know it is a set of cognitive skills that enable us to plan, focus attention, remember instructions, and juggle multiple tasks successfully. And routines are essential to support these skills by improving time management, because time management requires activating the use of executive functioning in the prefrontal cortex of the brain. But when we have a predictable schedule, that takes the pressure off of the prefrontal cortex and the cognitive overload again of what to do to complete tasks or how long they might take. The next thing that routines support in executive functioning is that they help with working memory, which is the skill of holding information in mind, manipulating it, and then using it in a goal-oriented fashion. And again, all this takes up cognitive workspace. And when a task becomes routine, it is not taking up that extra unnecessary space in the working memory to function. And then another point here is that routines are essential for getting our kids started, which we call that task initiation, and also to support maintaining task, which is sustained attention. Again, we say over and over again, organization, planning, prioritizing, these are all skills that are part of executive functioning skills that routine help us enhance them. So in NEST, we always emphasize that routines and procedures must be clear and easy to follow so that students are better able to process information, make choices, and engage with peers and teachers. And this is to say that routines need to make sense. In this slide, here's a quote by Fergus Murray, who is an autistic self-advocate, and he's a teacher and a scholar. And I took this quote from his blog post, which is understanding how routines help autistic people. So it says irrational routines and illogical rules do not contribute to a sense of safety. They feel instead like unreasonable demands eroding our sense of autonomy, especially if they impinge on our time spent pursuing what we are most interested in. He continues to say, sometimes feeling in control might mean sticking rigidly to routines, but other times it means being able to abandon routines that are not flexible enough to meet our needs. So we would like to ask you if you could write in the chat, what are some routines that you have noticed this school year from your kids, maybe like dropping off, picking up, or whatever that they bring home as part of their assignments? What kind of routines have you noticed? I'm going to also write this question in the chat for everyone. If you can tell us what you've seen this school year, or just in general as part of NEST routines. Yeah, Elaine, thank you for that. Yeah, it's not really, it's still routine and it's important. Thank you for mentioning that. Lining up at drop off and pick up. Beatrice, can you tell us more about what you mean in terms of activity, more activity? Rana, yeah, I hear you. What they did so that it was like part of a routine in school. That makes sense. Oh, wow. Yeah, exactly. So I see getting used to a new schedule, when to independently go to services. Yeah, amazing. Same person takes my son to his class in the morning. Nice. So there's that predictable person. diverse activities. Mhm.
Yeah, and I see Lane saying, I'm not sure what happens in the classroom, which I think is actually a really nice transition. So Yalda is going to share some examples of how Nest classrooms might embed routines into their day today.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Oh, can't see chat. Only option is host panelist FYI. Oh. Kate, I'm sorry to hear that. It should be working. I'm not sure how to fix that. That's amazing. I'm reading again about exiting, entering routines. Yep, I can read the replies. Okay, so the morning routine that my daughter does in class has stayed with her and she's able to share this with me, like getting off the bus, entering through exit, then coming into the class. That's a perfect example of a routine. More activity in the school classroom, fun stuff with the kids. That's really great to actually mention that like fun stuff can also be part of the routine. It's exactly the point.
I think I just fixed the setting, so hopefully chat should now be able to go to everyone.
I see what the problem was. So then the replies weren't going to everyone. I thought that, yeah. Okay, I see it here. Okay, so some of the routines that I guess like I can start with saying that in the NEST model, a well-organized routine throughout environment plays a huge role in creating a safe space for the students. And here I want to emphasize that safety is also in the eye of the beholder. So it is important to actively seek students' feedback about how they feel regarding the routines in place. Like with our younger ones, to keep an eye on their self-regulation and notice if there's anything that needs to be changed about the routine in the environment. But in general, here are some of the routines that the NEST classrooms implement. Entering and exiting routines that are established, posted, and used and referred to daily. There is expectation for behavior that are explained, and teachers explicitly teach each step using visuals. Students are prepared ahead of time, which we call priming, for any changes happening in the routine. And this is very, very important. So any changes in the routines, any new material or potentially challenging tasks, they are primed for that. And each teaching team or grade level should develop a specific self-regulation routine for the classes. Okay, so here are some visuals of some of the routines in the NEST classrooms. Hopefully you have gotten to see some in the students' classrooms. These are some examples of routines in the middle school and high school. So there is entering routine examples on the left-hand side. You can see that it's a whole class routine. They're color-coded, numbered, and on the right-hand side, you can see that there is a visual that goes with every single point on the routine. I can just read through them. So for instance, it says, sit down at a level 1. And then they are also referring level 1, which is taught explicitly as part of the behavior and expectation routine. And then you have take out planner and write down homework, and so on and so forth. So that's the entrance routine. This one I really like. It's a if then, and it uses non-speaking communication as part of routine. So for instance, if I have to go to the bathroom, then put 2 fingers up. When teacher approves, sign out, take pass, and sign in. If I have a question during lecture, then write your question on a Post-it, put it in the class parking lot. And if I have a question during work time, again, ask 3 classmates before ask me. So all of this is visually presented. They are in like a format that you can see. If I have to do, then what do I need to do next? Some more examples of exit and entrance routine here. So this one is for math class. It is a little bit blurry, but I'm going to try. Sorry for the quality of the picture. So place homework in folder, retrieve homework from folder, copy today's homework or assignment, complete do now, ask group members any questions about homeworks, or do now. So this one is an individual routine. And there is another example on the right-hand side, which is the exit routine for individual, which is return classroom material to proper place, move desks into the correct form, push in your chair, gather all your material, check in. Okay, so this one is an individual checklist. I personally really like checklists because it gives a lot of student agency. They are basically helping with kind of that working memory that I mentioned before. So take out my notebook and open it to the page I have been working on. Sign into my computer, open up today's lesson, and so on. This one is a whole class expectation routine. And as you can see, it's just so clear where they are at this time of the class. They're doing whole class, and then the expectations of that what needs to be done during this time of class are clearly laid out. I also love that they are, again, referring to those expectation routines. So for instance, if you see under the independence part of the class, it says level 1 voice, stay on task, raise hand for help, work on your own. So this is like the part that you're working independently, and the expectations are clearly there. You can go to the next. Okay, so more examples, attention signals. This one is more for elementary school. So teacher says hocus pocus, student says everybody focus. Again, these are all things that they practice a lot, they refer to it a lot, but they're also like laid out visually and very, very clear what needs to be done. And then on the right is a complete work, is an individual expectation. As you can see, there is like a visual on top of the bin that says stop, check for this, check for this, check for that before putting your work in the bin. Okay, so these are more of examples of possibilities for embedding breaks in a student's schedule. Somebody mentioned fun before, and it's kind of like that when you're making routines, embedding it, the fun part and the break part. So this one is like on a Monday after 8 to 8:43, you have ELA, then 8:43 to 8:45 is the walking break. Then it's math, then again, it's walking break. And on the right-hand side is more of like, this one is very, I put this example because it is also with each, I guess, item on your routine, there is that kind of push for task initiation. So like the first one is like entry routine, right? And I love that this teacher used like how long it'll take. So like entry routine would take 2 minutes, but then underneath, what is entry routine? What does that mean? So there is that task initiation, which is like pull homework in bin and then get today's handout out. and some examples of long-term management, time management. This is exactly the one on the right is what I use personally. So it's basically, you've got the calendar, and this is a writing project that has all the elements of writing, like gathering information and drafting and then editing and then publishing. And as you can see, it's so visually telling how long each phase will take. So for instance, you can see that some of the parts of the writing process takes longer, and revising is going to take shorter, or editing is going to take shorter than, say, gathering information or drafting. So it builds that long-term management. And then on the left-hand side is a 7-day studying routine plan. And finally, this is a break space routine. So what to do when you're overwhelmed and you have your options, and your routine can be that using a 0 as a hand signal, using a fidget, taking deep breaths, asking to use the break corner for 5 minutes, and again, using the time when making that routine, so that the learner has that expectation of how long that might take. And then sitting next to or talking to a teacher. But this is like, again, there is that element of choice in this one that I like, because you don't have to do all of this as part of your routine. You can choose which one you're gonna do.
So, and again, I know that there was a question about like, what does a self-regulation routine look like? So that would be an example of like at the individual level, what that regulation could look like, where we're really making a plan. And again, working with a student or working with the individual about what will work for them, and then laying it out so there's a clear routine. So we're going to switch gears and think about, how can we establish or build routines at home? But my guess is that many of you already have routines. I know someone put in the Q&A that they've been working like to kind of have more structure at home after school to reduce meltdowns. But I'm curious if everyone can put in the chat, and you should be able to select that the chat goes to everyone, but I certainly will read out responses as well. What routines have you implemented at home? And I think when we're thinking about routines, we're thinking really like it can be as broad as like we have a full after school schedule. It could be we always know that this thing comes first and this thing comes next. Or like maybe it's a fun family routine where like this is something we all do together that's important and predictable for us. So routines can really look a lot of different ways. But would love to hear. All right, so make a sandwich, get ready for school, right? And I like that it's specific. I do hear, that there's been some challenges with routines, and kind of balancing routines and positive reinforcement. I'll talk in a couple of slides about some ideas for maybe how to navigate challenges in implementing routines. Free time after school to decompress and relax before structure. I think that's a really nice reading of what your child's needs are in that moment. Chewing on mints or sugarless lollipops. So sucking on mints when you're anxious. I think that's a great way to know your child's needs and think about that sensory input that can be so regulating. I see take off shoes, walk in, take off bag, hang up coat, wash hands, go to the bathroom. Yep. And I like that's very concrete. You could see how that could be laid out and really regulating for that like end of the day. I need to know what to do. 15-minute break. Yep. I hear it like again, echoing that need for a break can be so important. Take out his lunchbox and take a break. Yep, absolutely. So having that regulation time. So a first then, another great example of a routine, right, where it's 2 steps. First, you're doing homework, then you're watching TV. An extra hour of quiet time before bed, so that schedule coming home. after homework. Snacks, yes, building, and sometimes snacks and eating really need to be built in as part of a routine, especially because some of our kids have a harder time noticing those physical cues of things like hunger and thirst. So sometimes having it built into the routine can help us all keep track of and make sure that that's happening, because being hungry is a really uncomfortable feeling that can often lead, at least certainly for me, to dysregulation as well. Yep, and so not a super strict routine, but shower, eat dinner, and go to sleep by 7. I think that's such a great point, right? It may not need to be super exact. Post-its, first steps. Kate, you read my mind. That's going to be on a slide in a couple. Oh, I really like that point, Carolyn, right? Like not trying to ask too many questions. So maybe your family routine is like you're leaving space when a child comes home. Oh, getting the lunchbox ready. That's a great independence skill. My goodness, you see, you all could be teaching this seminar on routines. These are excellent. Take a shower and read. Get off the bus to say hi to everyone. Take a 15 minutes to close his eyes to regroup, and start homework at 4. And yeah, for some of our kids, having that specific time is really anchoring for them. Yep. A lot of amazing, I'm trying to keep up with all of these amazing examples, but I see like examples about, you know, kind of what to do when you're walking in the door in terms of washing hands, putting things away, homework and having a break. Oh, a question about who is coaching the sample self-regulation routine. So it really depends on the individual school. Like it may be that teachers are working with the student, and maybe a social worker guidance counselor. If you have school specific questions around some of this, I would definitely encourage you to reach out to your school social worker guidance counselor. OICB, yes, some of that priming, absolutely. When you're doing something new, kind of explaining what's going to happen, that it's going to be safe. Read book and a map at bedtime. That's great. Yeah, and then saying we're going to try a specific homework time. Yeah, and I think times can be, and sometimes it's just figuring out what's going to work best for your family. So sometimes times are really anchoring for our kids, and it kind of helps everyone know, like, we can all look at the same clock, we see the same thing, this is the time. For some kids, it's a little trickier with time, and we need to be a little bit more fluid, and that's okay too. I think the beauty here is there's no right or wrong routine. It's about, we're going to talk about considerations for how it might work best for your family. And I see in the Q&A someone mentioned like a steady flow. So kind of removing items, washing hands, and then free time while cooking, and then bath time leads into dinner. Yes. So sometimes there are these routines that your family's implemented that are flowing from one thing to the next. Yes, and thank you all for sharing. And the conditions around homework, loose and casual. Yep, so I think, Carolyn, that's a really nice point, that like you're incorporating a lot of choice within your routine, which I think is so, so important. So like thinking about, okay, the goal is of this routine to complete X task, but how much choice can we build in? Are you on an exercise ball? Are you walking around? Are you, you know, listening to music or watching TV if a student can tolerate that? I know every student is different in how they can divide their attention, but I really appreciate that, Carolyn, because I think we really want, for routines to be helpful, we want the individual to feel included and have ownership over it. Because if it's just us imposing the routine, it's not going to be as helpful for the individual. Music on during the entire time of a routine. I saw in the Q&A someone share that they play music during their nighttime routine, which can be really regulating as well.
That's amazing.
Right, right. And Kate was saying we got so loose and casual that nothing is getting done, right? So again, for every family, it's a balance, and thinking about, okay, maybe we've gone towards one extreme or the other. I love that, Elaine, snacks with the homework, right? Like, let's fuel our brains as we're doing some of this activity. These are all awesome. Okay, so I think you all hit on all of these different examples. Just a few, again, ways to highlight if you're thinking about I want to build in a routine, or thinking about particular areas. So a lot of people talked about after school and evening routines can be super helpful, especially when a child's coming home after a long day. Morning routines can sometimes be helpful in thinking about how do we set up the morning and kids getting ready in the morning. Homework routines, again, thinking about choice around those. You all already mentioned, like sometimes having a certain time, making sure there's a break right before. Some kids, especially our younger kids, really benefit from having a specific routine around saying goodbye. So like if you're separating or dropping off at school, maybe having like a special like back and forth, or it's like, okay, we do 3 hugs and then you go into the building, can sometimes be grounding. Emotion regulation routines, we'll talk about some examples of those. Thinking about the weekends, again, every family and every child's going to need a different level of structure, but on those days when there's not school, sometimes it can be helpful to think about could a routine be helpful in that situation. But I see Richard, yep, he's been getting better remembering his routine. Yeah, and it takes a while to learn any new routine. It really can take some time and a lot of practice. We will talk specifically about routines around preparing for breaks or vacations or changes. Can sometimes be helpful to think about those times when the traditional routine or structure is going to be different. Sometimes we might want to think ahead of like what routines could we put in place. And then again, from like within a family culture, there might be specific routines around things you do at mealtime, things you do around the holidays, that sometimes we can even just make explicit for our kids, whether it's written out or previewed for them so that they can know what to expect. So again, I want to highlight this, and I think what's great is that because you all again, I appreciate so much all the sharing, we can see that routines are not one size fits all. So if you're thinking about, I want to put a routine in place, or if you're coming up against a barrier where you're feeling like something about this routine isn't feeling as effective, or I'm feeling like it's a battle a lot of the times. So, in terms of routines, I always recommend for families to really think about what's going to be sustainable. So, what's going to be realistic, what's going to feel sustainable for your family, because ideally this is a routine that we want to keep consistently over time. And that may mean we don't have a totally planned out to the minute routine of like, here's when snack is, here's when homework is. For some families that's sustainable. For other families, that's not their family style, and that's okay. Thinking about within the routine what your child might need your support with. So kind of taking a step back and thinking about what skills does my child have right now that they can navigate independently? Are there certain skills that they may need more help or support or building before we put this into a routine? Or maybe we need to really focus the routine at first about what that skill is and build out from there. Often it can be helpful to start simple. So if there's like 1 or 2 skills you really want to focus on, maybe starting there and building out. Again, we've highlighted this already, but really, really including your child in the discussion. So your child, I think nothing else, if you walk away from this seminar, this is the point I really want to highlight, is providing choices and including them in the discussion. And Elaine, I see your comment of like changing into comfy clothes. Some kids prefer no clothes. Yep. There might be like a lot of sensory input that's happening with those clothes. That's coming at the end of the day, right? Like whatever they're needing in that moment. But really talking to your child, giving choice within that routine, right? And sometimes there are things that have to get done, but we can give a choice of what order are they going to get done in? What do they want to do first? Do they want their break to be 10 minutes or 15 minutes? Kids tend to pick the longer one, but not always. So I think that can be really helpful. And I just want to highlight and validate that new routines take time to develop. And may not go smoothly at first. I'm laughing at Mark's comment as well. But I do think that's I just want to validate that, right? That like we may come up and we may collaborate and feel like we've got this routine, and day 2, it feels really hard. And so sometimes it can be really helpful, like to stick with it and to remember they don't necessarily need to be set in stone. We can do some revising. Yes. And And routines may need to include some positive reinforcement. So again, if we're building a routine around something that's really challenging for a student, by positive reinforcement, I mean anything from praise to building in a really positive activity after the tougher parts of the routine are done. Absolutely. And yes, I see, Helen, a lot of reminders. Yep. Yeah. So routines, like especially for everyone, but for many autistic kids, it may be that you are we actually recommend like going through the routine daily. So even if you're at a point where you feel like, well, of course, we need to remember this routine. If we think about some of those executive functioning challenges, our kids may need to go through it each and every day. And that's actually what they're doing in the classroom as well. So we're going to play just a clip. This is from an autistic individual. Their name is Tiffany or TJ. And we just wanted to highlight this quote because it talks about really empowering autistic individuals to be involved in their support and to be empowered around the kinds of supports and routines that they're needing.
On autistic teachers or people, anybody who's dealing with autistic people, I think there needs to be a level of choice, because sometimes we don't always need those supports. Sometimes my senses are like perfect that day. So having the supports would slow me down. So we need to learn when to always have the backups. We need to be taught those situations where we need to use our supports, but also we also need to be taught to tell people when we don't need the supports, or to not use the supports when we don't need it. We need to have the flexibility, which I think is not something I really hear able neurotypical people have a good understanding of.
Yeah, so again, just highlighting this need to include that voice, and that again, by building routines, we're also building self-advocacy so that individuals feel empowered at later points in their life to think about, what routines am I going to need as an individual that are going to be helpful for me? What routines am I going to want to build for myself? And I see in the chat some questions about getting ready for bed. So I'll try to weave that into some examples as well about ideas for regulating. And I appreciate, Elaine, your recipe of 2 hours of sports plus a bath as well. I think having some of that structure, and that it doesn't happen every day, right? I think is important to highlight as well.
On autistic.
Sorry. Okay. So again, some questions to ask or think about if you're building routine, or if you're trying to create a routine, or feeling like maybe a routine needs to be tweaked. So I think timing of the day is something really to be thinking about what tasks are you trying to do when. So I think you all actually gave really nice examples of this around the homework, that for some kids, they really need that break. And so they need, to not be trying to start homework the second they're walking in the door, or not be asking about what happened during their day the second they walked in the door. For some kids, it's the reverse. And like after a certain point in the evening, we know that their energy and reserves are going to be lower. So that might not be a time to include like the more challenging parts of the routine, right? So if we're thinking about like an after school routine, for example, thinking about the timing. Oh, and then I see Helen uses previewing for getting ready for bed. So saying ahead of time that it's almost our time to get ready for bed and finishing an activity. And that's a great example where timing might come in too, right? So like if there's an activity that's really energizing, can we try to move that up to earlier before bedtime? And can we start to think about the order of things that we're doing? Same thing in the mornings, like for kids who might be having a harder time like getting up or getting going in the morning. Sometimes it's a matter of thinking about, is there anything that we can do to tweak the order of this? So maybe they can have some things that they can do first when they're a little bit groggier, and then work their way up to getting ready to leave as well. Similarly, really thinking about the order of like preferred and interesting to less preferred. So if you're building a routine, and thinking about transitions, sometimes it is often easier to transition from something that's maybe a little bit less exciting or preferred to something that's more preferred, like to have that thing to look forward to. And I'm just responding to the chat. Timing it. Oh, after some experimentation, we discovered structured activities need to happen by 5 or attention level and fatigue are too great. Yes, and yes, Carolyn, thank you for raising that. I'm liking this too. I'm like this too, an adult thinking about how we're exhausted at the end of the day. Yes, I think that's such a good point. And also when you're building these routines to maybe check in with yourself. So like knowing where you're going to be at, like if it's a part of a routine, like maybe it's homework and that's historically like a more challenging time, we might want to think about when is that happening in the day, you know, if at all possible, when you're going to have a little bit more emotional reserves. Yep, and Helen, I see in the morning, setting a 2-minute timer. Yep, so that previewing, lots and lots of priming and using those visual supports is great. Thinking about, is there a skill to build first? So sometimes a barrier to a routine is that an individual may not know, you know, either what the expectation is or how to complete the skill. So sometimes before we can expect a routine, we actually need to teach whatever the skill is. An example I often give is cleaning your room. Because I think that is something, that is a skill, and knowing what a clean room is a skill. And so I think sometimes, you know, we might have an expectation of like, oh, well, you should, you know, keep your room clean as part of your routine. We actually might need to take a few steps back and really lay out, if this is a goal for your family, what really concretely does a clean room mean? Like, what are the steps to that? Does it mean your clothes are not on the floor? Does it mean, you know, your desk does not have a plate on it? Whatever the situation is, we might need to be building that skill.
That's kind of like what you're, the task initiation bits that you mentioned in your routine, that this is just how it's going to look like to get started.
Exactly, right? You know, thinking about the number of transitions, like especially, you know, if there's like a really preferred activity, sometimes it's helpful to think about how do we chunk things in an order so you're not having to transition back and forth between many different things. Again, the best case is you're building it together with your child, thinking about what's going to work for them, incorporating choice. Choice could even be built into the routine, right? And I'll show some examples of this. And this to allow for experimentation, as Carolyn was saying. You know, sometimes we need to try a few different things to figure out what's really going to work for the individual, and for your family as well. And yes, timers are great. It can be visual timers are sometimes really helpful. Auditory timers, like if it's like, you know, a timer on the phone, the microwave, I would always give the child a choice about what sound they want to hear and how loud they want it to be. So thinking about making sure it's not a sound that's like really jarring. But I think the concept of time is so abstract that any, you know, what is 2 minutes? What is 5 minutes? Using Alexa, perfect, right? Alexa can do that, because I think what 5 minutes means to us means something entirely different to kids. I think even all of us right now on this call would probably have a different estimation of what 5 minutes feels like. And so having that grounding and timer is really helpful in supporting routines and transition. Visuals. So going to that, visuals can really support routines. So just like we had visuals in the Nest classroom, we can think about a lot of different ways to use visuals. Sometimes it's just, you know, and we can keep them simple. So it might be like a first you're doing this, then this. Checklists can be helpful. So for some individuals, if the goal of the routine is like packing their backpack, it might be a visual checklist. Post-its can be helpful in a couple different ways. I know a parent mentioned that they do post-its and take them off. I love that, like throughout the day. Sometimes kids also are really sad. It's really satisfying to take off the post-it or crumple it up. You can also use a post-it just if it's a reminder as part of your routine, like sticking it on the mirror, sticking it on the fridge, on the front, you know, on the front door, you know, check for keys, wallet. Right? Like just having that visual cue. I think the key is that the individual is going to see it. you read my mind about timers. Yeah, I'll give timing sessions of video game play. And when time is up, he gets so upset, he thinks it's too fast. Yep. Right, because I think kids are learning like how much time that is. And when you're doing something really enjoyable, 30 minutes goes by so fast. Like I think about sitcoms that I watch and I'm like, what do you mean? Like I feel like I just sat down. So maybe having some visual supports to see the timing go down can be helpful. The reason I have a picture of deodorant on the sink is because sometimes the visual, like having the tangible thing available, can really help with the routine. So reducing that cognitive load. So if it's hygiene related, right? Like, and yes, go ahead. Thank you so much for joining us. If part of the routine is like we're working on remembering to put on deodorant, making sure the deodorant is placed in a predictable spot that's visual to the person. And I see Helen says, like, my son leaves his ID card at his desk and takes it with him every morning for school. That's a beautiful routine that incorporates a visual cue so that he's seeing it on his desk and knowing where it is. Yeah, sometimes, and again, that's a great thing where you can have individual choice, right? Like we can say, like, I'm noticing that it's hard to remember X, Y, or Z. Let's pick a spot for where we should keep it. And your child could absolutely pick the spot, but then it's the phone spot, it's the ID spot. You know, sometimes it's like, I know some students work on charging their phones when they get home. So it's like having the charger plugged in a visible spot in their line of sight as well. Suggestions. Oh, Jessica asked suggestions of where to find printable checklists. I'm a big fan of Pinterest. Teachers Pay Teachers has the word pay in it, but they actually have a lot of free resources as well. I have done a lot of checklists just in Microsoft Word because, as I'm going to talk about with visuals, it can be really helpful to incorporate your child's interests, right? Where you're like typing up a Word document. It does not have to be fancy, but they get to pick the color of the font. They get to pick what pictures are on it. B, I really appreciate your point using keywords instead of long directions. That's a great verbal routine to reduce that demand, right? So thinking about how do we shorten this step into a reminder word or a phrase. Also a great way to build an individual choice, right? Like what do you think could help us remember this? So for visuals, thinking about including those interests they have. So you're much more likely to look at something if it has something that you like on it. I'll give it kind of a fun example from my office. Actually, we have a room on certain rooms in our clinic. We have pictures with animals on them because it's designed to get our attention, and then the direction about the room will be below it. Like, oh, make sure you sign this out. You can also use photographs. So we want to make sure the visuals, if you're using images, are relevant to your child's experiences. And some kids enjoy taking the pictures. It could be pictures for younger kids. Sometimes they like having pictures of themselves doing each step of the routine. They could take pictures of their own belongings. So sometimes that can be helpful. I think having the visual easily accessible. So really having the visual available, because if the visual is like in a drawer or out of sight, it's a lot to expect that, you know, a child's going to then pull it out and look at it. So we want to really think about like where it's placed. Maybe it's at multiple places in the house. Maybe, you know, there's a predictable spot, like when they're walking in the door, of where it could be. And then the final thing, you know, is that less is sometimes more. So I think going back to B's great point that they raised in the chat, like, you know, really thinking about how much text is on there. And that, you know, are there ways to keep it comprehensible, but as simple as possible? But again, I do want to emphasize that visuals, you know, I'm going to show some examples, they can be kind of low tech, for lack of a better word. I'm certainly not an artist. The key here is that it's a visual support and a visual cue, but it may be as simple as like writing on a piece of paper, like 3 things that you're checking off and putting it on the fridge. And that's going to be a very powerful visual as well. So just a couple of examples. Again, this is certainly not exclusive of like different ways you might think about creating a visual of after school routines. What I like about this example on the left, and this is from a website called Teach, which is an intervention program developed out of UNC, is that you can see that there's actually choice embedded in the routine. And so this is a night of the week where Lee gets to pick what's for dinner. So it even leaves some flexibility in the moment and gets to pick what they're doing for game night. So it also leaves some flexibility within the routine that some things might be changing day to day and some things are the same. This is an example of like a getting home checklist, right? If a student is needing some support and what do I do when I get home? On the right, this is actually from our Nest Pinterest site. This is a really nice example of including interest. So this student was really interested in kittens and cats. So you can see that they found pictures of cats doing these different things to outline the steps. And again, it's broad, right? Like it's playtime, shower, ready for bed, reading, and bedtime. And you can see for the bedtime piece, they include like a regulating activity between the getting ready and going to bed, which can sometimes be helpful, so that there's a calming component. The reading with, in this case, it was reading with mom and dad, that's built in to that evening routine. This is just another example of how you might use visuals of like an after school schedule. So maybe it's less about the day-to-day routine, but really priming and previewing for your child. Okay, these are the different groups that we have. This can also be really helpful if there's going to be a change that you can put kind of on the weekly calendar ahead of time. And you'll notice in this example, Wednesday is free, right? So maybe Wednesday is a choice day or a less predictable day. But this can be a way for some kids, really what is helpful for them is to know kind of what they're looking forward to or what the expectation is on a given day. In terms of regulation routines, and what this can look like for individuals, I wanted to highlight a few different things around emotion regulation routines in particular. Is we really want to be clear in supporting our kids about when to use it. So our kids may need extra supports, you know, around when are these regulation routines helpful? Maybe it's certain contexts, like we're going to practice this before we start homework. Maybe it's if they're noticing they're frustrated, but we really want to make sure that we're kind of supporting them and understanding what those signs are. And it may mean that as caregivers, we might be prompting this more initially. Again, including choices in there. You know, emotion regulation is not one size fits all. Different strategies work for different kids. So having some choices built in. Having potentially a space or coping materials readily available. We are in New York, so space is, you know, often a challenge. I want to acknowledge that, but thinking about, is there like a quieter area, or have we designated a space that can be kind of a go-to, whether it's a child's room or maybe a part of their room that can be regulating. And then my tip that I usually emphasize is if you are thinking about putting in place a regulation routine, like what are we going to do when we feel upset at home, to actually practice these skills when called. Or if you're teaching a new routine, even around regulation, like I want to teach deep breathing, or I'm going to try, I know we've had parents in the past share that they've tried mindfulness or meditation with their kids. The real key is you really want to practice when called, because when you're already heightened, there's no room to learn a new skill. But if you're practicing some of these routines when you're calm and they become more familiar, it's a lot easier to access in the moment that you're heightened because it's more familiar. This is just an example of like this, like a choice board for like break activities, where there were kind of different related to this individual's interests, like different options they had to choose from. This was in the case where the break was actually kind of built in the after school routine. Again, ways to use visuals to support regulation routines. This is again from Teach, but this is flower candle breathing. It's one of the many ways you can teach deep breathing. There's lots of visuals around this. But the idea here is you're filling the flower, blowing out the candle, right? And so this, you may, instead of having a full regulation routine, you might be starting with, this is how we're teaching a skill and breaking it down. And maybe we do this each night before we go to sleep. So it's in a calming moment that we're practicing, or we do this together before we start dinner. Kind of picking that calm moment to practice. In the bottom, thinking about like a break box or a sensory toolkit. You can do this, you can put this together with things you have at home, but thinking about, is there a place I can store 2 to 3 regulating things for my child that we can then kind of cue them visually to use when they're starting to feel frustrated? Oh, Elaine, great question. Is this from Nest programming across sites or example from your own experience? So these are all examples from my own clinical experience. So all the home interventions are based on like clinical knowledge and experience. The examples we showed at the beginning were from specific like Nest schools. So they're gonna look different at different schools, because each school is different, but the core principles of having like entry and exit routines, having self-regulation strategies, having break areas are more consistent across Nest programming. And then the last one is for a student who maybe, again, there's more words on this, right? And so maybe a student who's been working for a while on a specific regulation routine. So you can see here, it says when I'm in the yellow or red zone. So this student was using like a system where like yellow and red for them signaled like frustration. You could replace this with whatever language your child is using, but the key here, right, is we're being really explicit about here's when to use this, that they were going to take 3 bubble breaths, think of their favorite TV show, listen to a song, they have a coping statement, check in with how they're feeling. So again, this is something that this child definitely probably built some of these skills over time, but examples of different kinds of visual supports or regulation routines you can build in. And I think the key here is you can also prime these. So if you're going into a part of the routine that does tend to be more stressful or more anxiety provoking, going over and saying, remember, here's what we can try if you notice that you're starting to feel frustrated, or if you make a mistake. I know making a mistake is hard for many of our kids, or if you don't know what to do on this particular problem. Morning routines. So again, just some examples. I like checklists, or this is an example of a visual where you're moving it from like to do to all done, as Yalda pointed out earlier, gives the student some ownership, or the individual ownership in completing the activity. And thinking about kind of like how to break that down. Again, you might be tweaking the order based on your child. Your child may not need to use the bathroom right away, but they might be one who really needs to use it right before they go on the bus. And so maybe you're thinking about building that in as well. I see a comment in the chat about using timers, but hard complying with ending an activity, even if there was an agreement beforehand. Yeah, ending an activity and transitions are it's really hard. I don't know, Yalda, if you have thoughts on this, and then I can weigh in as well.
Yeah, so the context really matters. If it's an activity of interest, obviously that is the most difficult one to stop. And really, I think that when this happens, it's really important to give that flexibility. And I would first say that like making it more flexible, so that when the individual is ready, they can move on from the activity. The point is that if we're building routines, and if we're specifically talking about routines, and we're including the child in making the routines, then there should be that element of recognizing the need for the child to be then later on able to ask for what you need, right? that would lead to that self-advocacy. So I think like for activity like that, yeah, it does take a little
Takes
longer.
longer.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think the other things I'll add is that sometimes we can be flexible. And this doesn't work for, I'm thinking especially for like gaming and computer activities. Sometimes when that 30 minutes are up, the child like really is in the middle of a game that cannot be saved, which could feel really frustrating. So sometimes it's helpful to set boundaries around like components of the activity as opposed to time, right? So like, okay, like you're going to watch 3 YouTube videos and then we're going to do the next thing, or you're going to play until you get to, you know, until this round ends and then you'll be done. That of course is really individual specific because some games just never end. So that is harder to do.
The time can has the choice too, right? Like how long would you like to end it? Like 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, like whatever it is, but giving choice in picking the amount of time. I don't know if you have tried that, Greg.
Yeah, Ben Helen says, I'll ask how much more time, and when that time is up, it's over. I also think thinking about having something like if we're asking them to transition off something that's really enjoyable, what are we asking them to transition to? And does there need to be maybe an intermediary? So if it's like, okay, we have to transition to get ready for bed, and getting ready for bed is not a preferred task, can we build in something brief in between? So like we're transitioning off of electronics, but you're going to get to tell me about the video you just played, and then we'll start the bedtime routine. Or we're going to transition off of this, and then we're going to look at a book together for a few minutes, and then, you know, potentially start the next thing. But knowing what's coming next, and then knowing when they're going to be able to access it again is sometimes helpful. Also, I know a parent earlier was saying they do like 30-minute chunks throughout the day, which is great. So really priming, or even having a visual of like, remember, you're going to get to go back on the computer after these next couple of things are done as well. Yeah, choice on time, loves reading and would do it all day forever. Yeah. Yeah, no, I hear you. Absolutely. And yes, exactly, Gregory, right? Like it's both of these things. It's like such a wonderful strength and something we want, because we want to support eventually him and your child, your kiddo in doing other things and meeting other goals that they may have in the future. I just wanted to put on, yep, getting the nighttime routine is getting the shimmies out, having movement. Yep. Thinking about the kind of regulation can be really helpful. For personal hygiene, I think sometimes this can be a way to break down a skill, like hygiene can be a skill. I sometimes have gotten questions about like showering. I'm a fan of like putting a schedule in a Ziploc bag, tape it to the shower wall, but even having a visual breaking down of like, what are the steps to showering? What are the steps to brushing teeth? Can be helpful. I also want to say for personal hygiene, this is where student choice really comes in, because often there are sensory components to this. So thinking about, can students choose certain soaps, certain toothpastes? Are there certain textures that we can make more comfortable and accessible to the individual as well? Oh, Richard says, my son can't sleep in the dark, so I play a boring TV show on his TV to help him sleep. Is this a bad habit? What would you say is the best alternative to use? I think that it sounds like you're really trying to meet your son where he's at. Mark, I like your idea of NPR radio. I wonder about like a nightlight or a light dimmer that could be used. Because it sounds like there needs to be like some light. Some people like certain like sound, like YouTube can play certain like loops of like meditation or sounds. Oh, I love the idea of a lava lamp. That's a great idea. That's a very creative idea. Calming music. See, like we've got a lot of really awesome ideas to try. Yes. And I want to say, like, it's not, you know, I think you're doing the best you can and meeting your child where they're at. And so it's just about exploring, like, can we try out some other things as well? I just wanted to highlight that some of our kids may need some priming around post-COVID changes. Now that we're things are still continuing to evolve. Sometimes previewing and being really explicit. And yes, of course, feel free to leave as people need to drop off. I know 90 minutes is a long time and this will be recorded. Yep. Oh, and I see B that she's 5 and you practice saying the steps and then doing it. That's great. So you're using like a verbal script, like a verbal routine, right? Of like, let's go through the steps and practicing. I think that's great. For post-COVID changes, just highlighting, that there have been shifts and that everyone's going to have personal choice, but that others may not be following the same rules as your family, or other places have different rules. I was talking to Yalda earlier about the clinic, the NYU Child Study Center where I work is still requiring masks, but many kids don't have masks required at school. So sometimes it can be helpful to be really explicit. Or think with your child, if they are in a situation, how they might advocate or what they could say, if, for example, wearing a mask is important to them. So again, just highlighting that, some of these things that we're all adapting to in this world, breaking them down, making it explicit can be really helpful, because a lot of routines that we really, really hammered home for the past 2 years are now changing, right? Which we're all adjusting to, but our kids may need some support in that as well. Coping with changes. This is a sign I took from our Nest Pinterest. I loved it. Saying like, sometimes our smart board stops working. So how do we cope with changes in routine? So what I like about this visual is it's very concrete and upfront about what can we do. So I think with coping with changes, so anticipating bigger changes. So sometimes thinking ahead of time, school holidays, maybe a parent needs to travel for work, long weekends, for example. So thinking about how do we prime, again, kind of let kids know ahead of time about some of these changes. So when possible, previewing and explaining why the changes are happening. I think that explanation can be really helpful, of why something's going to be different, because it helps our kids, again, going back to that quote from the self-advocate, that it feels logical. I think when you're previewing, it also is really helpful to focus on the knowns or what will stay the same. So if there is a change coming up, thinking about, okay, for example, mom is going to be away this week. Here's what's going to be the same. Your bedtime is still going to be the same. You're still going to be going to school. You're still going to have your favorite snack. So really thinking about what are the knowns. And then also sometimes considering like a plan B or a backup plan can be helpful. So if you're going into a new environment or situation, thinking about like, okay, and if this, if there's a long wait, what can we do? For those of you who are flying or maybe traveling, I have found that it is really helpful for kids to think about, okay, if we get to the airport and our flight is delayed, like, here's our plan. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to have extra time. We're going to bring something to read, and really focus on what you can do in that moment. And this is all to say, and I really want to highlight and just validate that, like, we can't prepare for every change in routine, and that sometimes unexpected changes do happen. And so I think that's where we can support some coping plans or regulation around what can we do when the routine changes, really a lot of validating when something unexpected happens. But for things where we do know there's going to be a change, using some of these strategies can be really helpful in supporting coping when these things are coming up. And then Yalda pulled these visuals, and I just think they're so fabulous in thinking about travel and vacation, for example. Did you want to talk
Yeah, this is from a podcast that's called TLT Parenting with Debbie Reber. I don't know if anyone has heard it. I highly recommend. But they talk about if there is a big change in routine coming up, like going on vacation, then some ways you can reduce the anxiety around that is by exploring and researching the aspects of a planned event well in advance. So talking through and getting clear on those expectations.
Yeah, and again, you can see that there's like a template here for like giving space for any concerns or questions your child has. What's a potential solution? I like on the right, it kind of highlights what might be, important for the child. So like, when are they going to get to swim? When will they have their screen time if screen time's an option?
Exactly.
So making that more concrete and
yeah, to have to incorporate that into the daily plan. So that also helps, again, like the individual to realize what their needs are when they go through it beforehand.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to read out because the Q&A, I'm not sure if everyone can see, but someone shared around like the nighttime routine that I just wanted to show that there was like a connection there, that this individual was saying there's a nightlight that I mediated it to a low volume, tried music. So choosing something they're not interested in with a timer in terms of like having that kind of input to help with sleep in particular. So I think, we have about 7 minutes.
We have about 7 minutes, and I just dropped the, here again, the link to the evaluation. I feel like this is going to be really helpful for us, even though we came up with some of the topics for the next meeting, but we can always incorporate what you think you need to hear more about. So please, please, please let us know. Yeah.
And I see a comment, a question around like this idea of compliance, and no matter what is proposed, my child seems to take kind of this oppositional stance by default. Weighing in, I see some people talking about like paradoxical instructions. Yep, Jasmine saying depends on the situation. It can be context dependent. So different things depending. I also would think about like, are there ways to incorporate more choice or a sense of control proactively? So like, are there things that your child can have total control and choice over? So you're kind of picking and choosing. Yeah, he's smart enough to know the difference. Yeah, our kids are really smart. And reverse psychology is way out there. So I might think about really thinking about like, how do we build in choice, and how do we build in options or parts of the routine that can be really child-led, even if that varies from day to day, can sometimes be helpful. But I hear you. I think it can be really certainly can be challenging to work through some of these situations. Thank you all so much for participating.
Thank you.
And I'll go ahead, Yalda.
No, I was just going to say that we will send out a newsletter a week from now, in which there will be a recording. The session will be there, the link to this session, and there will be some other information that you asked. For instance, Jessica asked for printable checklist, like a website to find, and all this. Like we will try our best to include some resources for you in there regarding routines and the visuals.
Jessica asked, are there links, are there prior recordings? I believe so. I will want to confirm, because we did 3 of these sessions last year, and I believe we did record them. What I need to investigate, and in all honesty, is where those recordings are currently living, because we often sent them as part of our newsletter. Yes. So this is our first one of this year. But we did have some from last year that I believe Yalda and I can put our heads together and figure out a way that we might be able to make those accessible as well.
Sure. Yeah, I said yes to the handout, the PowerPoint.
And I see some thank yous. I just want to thank all of you for being so active in the chat, for participating, for being willing to share what's working for you and questions. This is like my favorite part of my role, because because I really appreciate really being able to hear from all of you. So yes, everyone go relax, enjoy your evening.
Thank you so much for joining. I wish that we had more time to hang out, actually. There is, yeah, thank you. There is, again, here the link to the evaluation, just in case you didn't get it. I'll also include it in the newsletter. Thank you so much.